Hello and welcome, one and all, to episode number 26 of the Creative Outlet Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Pudwill, as always, your host forever on this show, and ever, and ever, and ever. But what will not be forever and ever and ever is today's date, which is June 30th, 2023, and we're here today because we're finally getting to start on the true newish path for this show. I mean, it's really not that much of a new path. It's just a matter of, I want to shorten things. We got two topics today. We're going to dedicate some time to a product and a special situation that's going on that is surrounding a different product, one that I think is fairly complicated in the case of the latter. And that sort of explains the title today, which is, I don't know about these. Now that exact sort of tone, I only really feel for the first thing we'll be talking, well, not actually the very first thing we'll be talking about today, but like the first when we're getting into the main meat of things. But the other one, it's more like, I mean, the situation's really, really complicated. You got to dive into what's going on here. Of course, now that I've done some research into these topics, and yes, I will tell you what they are shortly. Don't worry, I'm not going to keep you in suspense too long. I mean, I do literally know more about them, but you know, when I title this, I guess I just don't understand what the folks behind each one of these projects is going for. But I think I've beaten around the bush around what they are long enough. Today's topics are going to be focused on Sony's Project Q, and then we're going to be talking about the debacle, as I've been using, the brouhaha, maybe you might want to say, surrounding the Dolphin Emulator and its Steam release. But first, before we get into that in this intro land that we're in, I suppose we need to talk about something that's happened fairly recently, which is what happened, well, I would say 2 days ago, but it happened at 8 o'clock at night in the Central Standard Time Zone. So I don't know if I'd really say it happened 2 days ago, but in theory it was supposed to have happened June 28th, the release of the Pikmin 4 demo, which, you know, if you've been following this, I suppose you would have already known the two topics of today. But you would also likely know that, man, I have been excited for this ever since it was announced. Even though I didn't get to talk about it when it was revealed, but I would have been really excited. I'm going to stop singing now. But I have, in the last 24 hours, mostly just a large part of yesterday when I should have been sleeping, but that's beside the point, I spent time playing the demo to Pikmin 4. And I want to get the immediate question out of the way for folks right now. How do I feel about the controls? The controls have been my main concern since this was revealed, and I can now tell you what's going on. They are not nearly as good as the Wii and the Wii U pointer controls. I wouldn't even say Pikmin 4's controls are as good as those in Pikmin 3 Deluxe. Now, I should point out on that point, I prefer using the pure gyro mode for Pikmin 3 Deluxe. So, you know, when I'm comparing Pikmin 4's controls, I'm comparing it to that. You know, some other people will use the stick, some other people will use the hybrid, and they have that preference. This is the comparison I'm making it to. However, even though I would rank them third place overall, I still like the controls. They're certainly a lot better than the GameCube Pikmin controls, in my opinion. Okay? Again, some people love those stick controls. I happen to disagree with them, but they are entitled to that opinion. The main issue I have with the Pikmin 4 controls, of course, given that I enjoy the gyro mode, and I've already cited the Wii version and the Wii U version of the Pikmin games, the motion controls in Pikmin 4 are not always on. But I will say, in my experience, when they become fully enabled, when you use the whistle And while you're throwing your Pikmin, they do get the job done. I would vastly prefer pure all gyro, but this is getting the job done. I can't complain about it. And I think part of what helps these controls with the enemies, though I could also see this becoming a huge setback, and I'll describe more on that why later, is the auto lock-on. So in Pikmin 4, one thing that gets explained is whenever the cursor comes across an enemy or a pellet posy or maybe a piece of raw material, which I should point out, I previously thought that was just the pure sparklium because they had collect sparklium on the screen as Pikmin were collecting it. I thought that was sparklium. I was incorrect about that. That is raw material that then gets turned. It's what you turn in at the lab for upgrades, or you can convert it to things like bridge materials. What happens when the cursor comes across those is the cursor will remain locked on that object, especially if you stop moving. If you keep moving, it will move to other items generally. But if there's a lot of things that sort of encircle something that you've locked onto, the cursor just sort of jumps around between those items. And if you press the ZR button, that's the trigger, that will keep the cursor locked on one specific target while you are moving. And pressing the button again will change your target while maintaining that lock. So you can still move, and basically the camera rotates around that target. And I like that quite a bit, but where I can see it becoming a problem, and I've already experienced this a little bit, not in this specific scenario, I have a slightly different one, but I can see it becoming an issue when you have to tackle a large group of enemies. Because if you have the cursor trying to go all over the place, trying to lock on to all kinds of different things, it's very possible that you will not be throwing your Pikmin on what you intend to, and some of them will be eaten or crushed or just die in some way as a result. This isn't the example I was going to cite because, like I said, I have a non-enemy related example, but I can say also I did have it happen a little bit when I came across some sheer grubs in the opening area here, the sun-speckled terrace. And it's because sheer grubs come up in groups of female and male sheer grubs. Female sheer grubs are harmless. Male ones can eat Pikmin. And I have seen the lock-on kind of get tossed between them all when I'm just right around them. But the main area I experienced it in, I've been playing the demo somewhat incorrectly, or at least outside of the intended way, because what they want you to do is the demo ends once you finish a day where you've officially collected 1,500 sparklium. And then after that, you can't play anymore. But I want to keep playing, dang it. So, as it turns out, you can completely, 100% complete the sun-speckled terrace within the demo. The way you have to do that is by collecting all the other stuff first, and that includes collecting all the castaways, and it also includes collecting all of the onions in the area, as well as something that I saw explained in an article last week, but I didn't talk about it here because I didn't know for sure if it was going to be real or not, or if the article is exactly right. I'm thinking that includes the Flarlic bulbs, which those are bulbs that allow you to bring more Pikmin out onto the field. It increases your maximum count. So you start the game with only being able to have 20. Now I'm able to have up to 40 because I've found 2 Flarlic bulbs. Anyway, I bring that up because I experienced it trying to get the blue onion. Yes, the blue onion is not the last one you get in this game, unlike every other Pikmin game so far, where blues are the last type of Pikmin that you get. And I was having a real tough time bringing it down because it turns out the only way, at least that I've figured out, maybe there's some other way to get it down, is you need to have 40 ice Pikmin and you need to have upgraded Ochi to the 3rd level buff ability, because that allows him to carry objects with the strength of 10 Pikmin. So you need to because the blue onion is unfortunately sitting across a body of water, and if you had blue Pikmin already, you'd be able to carry it back to the onion, to the master onion, but you can't do that because you don't have blue Pikmin without the blue onion, or at least so far, because you haven't discovered any wild blue Pikmin in any of the caves. That's actually a new mechanic for this game. I'm not really going to go into that there or here, but it is interesting that you can encounter wild Pikmin in caves and just add them to your party without even having found an onion for them yet. So you can have purple Pikmin. Well, I suppose they've never had an onion, but maybe they will have an onion in this game. I'm not sure yet. Here's a better example. Maybe you'll found rock Pikmin in a cave, but you didn't find the rock onion, so you can't spawn more rock Pikmin, but you have basically the number of rock Pikmin you find. That's your finite number until you find the onion. So anyway, you throw 30 ice Pikmin into the water to freeze it, but the onion requires 20 Pikmin to be carried over. If you have a max of 40, that means you can only have 10 ice Pikmin carrying the onion back, so you need Oatchi to be at the strength where he has 10 Pikmin carrying power. And when I was trying to accomplish getting the blue onion from where I had last left it, I was having all kinds of trouble with the cursor going all over the place, because the space where it ended up, there's also a burgeoning spiderwort. That's the ultra spicy spray plant. And of course the body of water, and then there's a little like air geyser there, and it's a little bit of a mess, but eventually I figured it out. So like I said, I can see that becoming an issue at some point. I also want to say on the controls, I've been having a little trouble keeping some of the buttons in track in my head. Well, really, it's just the plus and minus buttons, because most of the controls are pretty much the same from Pikmin 3 Deluxe. The main difference here is, in Pikmin 3 Deluxe, you pulled up the cop pad, which is your map, with the minus button, and you paused with plus. In Pikmin 4, you pull up the map with the plus button, and you pause with minus. And I don't know why they switched that, but maybe that's just something I'll have to go into the custom controls and swap myself. Now, something I was going to talk about here originally until I experienced it with the motion controls too, is I was thinking like, I'm going to figure out a way, because in Pikmin 1 and 2, as far as I can tell, as long as you're still holding B or A, the gyro is always on. But that's, like I said, that's not the case in Pikmin 4. So I was going to suggest like, here's a way you could basically do that. Nope, I would be wrong on that. Can't do that. So, the controls are what they are. So like I said, the buttons aside from plus and minus are pretty much jiving with me. So far, at least in the first area and the caves in it, I am enjoying Pikmin 4's controls. Now, something I'm not going to spoil here at all is any of the story, because shockingly, the demo reveals quite a bit of it if you let it. I mean, right out of the gate, it spoils something that hasn't been in the promotional material at all, which is really cool. But if you read through some stuff, you can really get a lot more into the story than I think they intended you to get to again, because they wanted you to collect 1,500 Sparklium right away and call it good. But I'm not going to talk about that here because the game isn't out yet. But like I said, I will comment on the fact that I think there is some super interesting stuff going on story-wise in this game. So even though it looks like this is all it is, Pikmin 4 it's much more than just this simple quest to rescue Olimar and the Rescue Corps and any castaways that are on PNF 404. So there's a lot more to it, and I'm excited to see how it expands as the game goes on. Now, there are 4 Pikmin types in the demo. I already talked about, you've got your blues, I have ice. The other 2 are reds and yellows. And I mostly want to address the ice ones here. The reds, the blues, the yellows, they're always as we've known them to be since Pikmin 2. I guess, obviously some changes in Pikmin 3 came to each. But I want to address the ice Pikmin because they're new, and for me, I don't really feel like they've actually added that much. They looked really cool in theory. In practice, they have not... I'm just realizing cool. But in practice, they have not been as useful as I thought they would be. And, I've seen them do some of the fun things they do. Obviously, I've had them freeze water, and that is really helpful, but it's kind of situational because you need water, and considering your low Pikmin counts you're able to have, for sure at the start, it's kind of hamstrung by if you can only have 40 Pikmin and you have a body of water that needs 30 to freeze, maybe they're not the best choice to do that right now. You're just making things a lot harder on yourself. But I've also seen them freeze enemies as they showed off early in the reveals here, and it's been interesting, but I actually haven't really found it that useful. Like, it's useful, don't get me wrong. Obviously, you're getting free time to wail on the enemy with the rest of your Pikmin, but it just hasn't had the level of impact that I thought it would. But, of course, it's also early in the game, so it could just be, that in this first area, there's only 2 bodies of water, so that ability to freeze water use is pretty situational. And it could also be that there are going to be more moments where you have to use Ice Pikmin as a potential solution to a problem, and that enemies are going to become so ferocious that it's like, God, I really just need to freeze them right away and then just keep wailing on them with ultra spicy spray. And then Ice Pikmin really show their use. But so far, honestly, not super duper duper plussed with the Ice Pikmin. And something else that I'm not fully a fan of yet, but after certain events, he gets a lot better, is Oatchi. At the start of the game, I think you have to basically complete 2 caves, or you have to complete some kind of thing to make this happen. But at the very start of the game, Oatchi is not at his full size, so you cannot ride him, you can't have Pikmin ride him. He's not nearly as useful as he could be. But after he goes through that growth spurt, I think he finds a lot more use. But I still don't really find a ton of use for him. A lot of my time so far, I say this is an exaggeration, I suppose, but a lot of my time so far has been spent trying to throw Pikmin when instead I am commanding Oatchi, because Oatchi just happens to be the bubble that's coming up in my group, and I think I'm looking at, say, the yellows, which are the same color as Oatchi, and I want to be throwing them, but instead I am pushing Oatchi forward to go do something. But I do think that the more skills I apply to him, using the pup drive, which you get from collecting castaways, the more useful I think he's going to be. Because, like I said, at the start of the game, he can't carry Pikmin, he can't carry you, he can't even do that thing where he carries you through the water right at the very start. You need to wait a few days before he is able to do that. And I want to find more uses for him, but I think that's going to really come once I fully level up his command abilities to be able to tell him to go places and gather Pikmin and do things like that while I go do the adventuring I want to go do. I think he's going to be kind of just a sort of support guy. I don't really like having him in my party personally. I also, I know he's a dog and all, but I think there's some skills on him that I don't think were needed. Because, like I said, I understand he's a dog, but I also think it kind of takes the exploration out of Pikmin to have Oatchi track scents and take you straight to treasures, or take you straight to caves, or to, to onions or whatever, because I want to find that stuff for myself. And, I know that might seem hypocritical for me to be like, man, I don't like open world games, and I don't like having to explore and just get lost. But I think, Pikmin has never really had super big areas. The Sun-Speckled Terrace is definitely the largest area that Pikmin has had so far, but it's really not that big of an area. In fact, I don't think it's really that much bigger than any kingdom in Super Mario Odyssey. So, I can easily go around and find the treasures myself without having to tell Oatchi to do that. So I think that's kind of unneeded. Speaking of things that are unneeded, or at least things that would be easy to abuse, because I've already found myself doing this, I want to briefly touch on something that I didn't have in my notes here, but it's the rewind time feature. I have already found myself using it a couple times, and I'm kind of mad at myself for doing that because it's so convenient when I have stupidly lost a bunch of Pikmin to something to just go back in time and rewind by 1 minute. And sure, there were many times in Pikmin 2, because Pikmin 2 is full of a lot of reset-worthy moments, where I went and, yes, as I just said, reset the game. But at least in that case, I have to go through all the song and dance of waiting for the game to boot up again. So there's at least some kind of punishment there. Being able to rewind time, sure, maybe I need to take down an enemy again. Maybe I need to resolve a puzzle. But there's very little in the way of punishment for going back in time. So I don't know if I'm really a fan of that feature, even though I have found myself using it. But let's get back to some positives, right? I talked about the world and how it's really not that big. I do actually love how the world looks, though. I think it's got a lot of great man-made landmarks, which aren't something that we see or have seen a ton of previously in Pikmin. You know, we've never had a game where there's a wooden bench, at least as far as I can remember. There's probably a bench somewhere in Pikmin 2, where you see giant wooden wheels and eventually you go inside a human house. And to me, that just, the fact that there is all this man-made stuff is giving Pikmin 4 a truly unique feel compared to the other games, and I like that a lot. I also think it adds quite a scale to the game because, you know, in the marketing, they're really trying to get you to play with the camera right behind you, but you can pull it out. I prefer having the camera pulled backward with the more classic, closer to top-down view. I'm used to that. I think it works better. But even with it pulled back like that, since there are still all these man-made landscapes, apparently I'm mixing up landscapes and landmarks. Since there are all of these man-made landmarks, and since they're so big, even with the camera pulled back, I think that scale still applies really well. So the idea of really making your captain and your Pikmin feel tiny has been pulled off just excellently so far. And similarly on the world, this, to me, is the Pikmin game with the most elevation by far. I mean, you literally have to climb walls, for one thing. And there are caves and treasures that are way on top of hills that you have to scale. And it's so tall. It's got so much like height that you've never seen in a Pikmin map before. All the previous ones have been fairly flat. I mean, not to say that there's no elevation in any of them, but like you compare going up a little tiny hill in the Forest of Hope in Pikmin 1 to going to scaling this much larger, almost seems like a mountain path in Pikmin 4, and it's just they feel so different. And you know, it also seems to me like these areas are going to be pretty densely packed because I've stumbled upon all kinds of treasure, both above ground and below ground, which in some ways, like I said, it's an issue because it's like I want to collect all these treasures, but I can't, or I have to the game won't let me keep going anymore. But like I said, if you play your cards right, you can collect everything in the sun-speckled terrace, and that's my goal right now. You can get, like I said, the game limits you to 1,500, but I've seen posts of people getting like 3,500 sparklium as they get 100% in this area, and it's crazy. So you can get over double your target, and I think that's great. Speaking of below ground, though, I brought up the caves. I have tried out all of the caves in the area. Maybe there's still one I'm missing, but I'm fairly certain I've gone into all of them. I do have all of the castaways as far as I can tell, so I'm fairly certain I've gone into all of them. And I think I might have to retract a little bit of my commentary so far on the caves. They do definitely appear to be designed by hand, which I think is great. That was one of the biggest issues in Pikmin 2, is that you could have a randomly generated dungeon and it could just screw you in a really ridiculous way. Whereas in Pikmin 4 here, since you have a cave or a dungeon that is designed by hand, there's a lot more intentionality in where items are placed and the puzzles that you have to do to solve to get them. And that has been really, really helpful. But these are early caves, so I don't know if they've really met the idea of being like Pikmin 3's treasure missions. Now I do have to put a pin in that, because I'm gonna actually bring it up a little bit later here, because there is actually something that I have encountered so far that actually seems to be even more of an analog to that. So either way, though, on the caves, I am hoping that they do become more complex as they go on, that they become more like, hey, this is like a Pikmin 3 level, but a mission mode level, but without a timer. Because right now they're pretty basic to me. I'm not super plussed by the caves. I have been able to try all as well. There's one Dandori battle in the Sun-Speckled Terrace, and there is a Dandori challenge, I think it's called. The Dandori battle it's exactly what it says in the marketing. You have a set amount of time to collect as much stuff as possible. As it turns out, items do respawn, so you have to keep collecting things throughout the entire time. The first battle with what appears to be possessed Olimar-like creature was pretty easy. I didn't really have any problems with it at all, but I had fun with it, so it'll be interesting. Those are supposed to take place in caves too, but what also takes place in caves are what seem to be these Dandori challenges. And those are Pikmin 3 treasure mission mode levels. There is one in the Sun-Speckled Terrace. Now, I don't know if in the final game they let you do this, or if it becomes available from a menu at a later point, but the first one that I played, it's called Dandori Daycare, because it looks like it's like in an underground little daycare, I suppose, or like a children's playroom. I barely got a bronze medal on it because it was my first time playing it, and now that I've collected the castaway, because you have to at least get a bronze medal to collect the castaway in that level, I can't play it again. So I'm hoping in the final game I can play it again, because I'd really like to get a platinum rank on that level, because that's how I love the Pikmin 3 mission mode challenges, and this is exactly what it is, and I want to do more of that. And of course I say that, and I haven't even platinumed, still to this day, one of the mission mode maps in Pikmin 3. I just cannot platinum the Beastly Caverns to save my life. They're hard. Another thing, thus far, the character creation, it doesn't really seem all that consequential to me. I do wish you could get more into the nuts and bolts of the creation, though, because you can choose only between preset faces and body styles, and they're tied to or hairstyles, but they're tied to the body type that you choose. So if you pick the Olimar-looking body, or you pick the Louie-looking body, or you pick the Charlie-looking body, well, the faces that go with that are the only faces you can have. You can't pick a face that goes with the Olimar-style body on the Louie-style body. So, and same thing for the hair. You can't have the Louie-style hair on the Charlie-style body. And I would prefer that it just went straight up me channel and let me choose all the parts on my face and choose between all the hairstyles, but I guess that just is what it is. It's not designed as well as I'd hoped it would be. Similarly, I know there's some complaints that, you have an avatar, so now they're a silent protagonist, and so now you don't get as much flavor text from your character. I haven't really found that to be a big deal. There's plenty of flavor text that comes from other characters. You get a lot of Olimar text in his voyage logs. I haven't really missed having my character speak at all because I have all these other characters who can speak just fine. But I would agree with others that my comrades that don't actually come with me, but they're just apparently watching me the entire day, Colin and Shepard, they are talking a lot during the gameplay. I need them to stop talking all the time because it's kind of getting annoying. Also, on the topic of sound, things that make sound, I'm really good at the segues today, aren't I? I actually haven't found the music to be all that impactful. And to be fair, I haven't really found a lot of Pikmin music to be that impactful, but, each game so far has had at least a couple of super memorable tracks, and at this point, the only one for me in Pikmin 4 that isn't explicitly a remix is the title theme. So, hoping the music picks up as we get into later areas, but right now, not really into the music, unfortunately. And something else that I don't think the game does enough with is this theme of Dandori. Now, this is something I brought up since the game was even revealed to be a thing, is that there's a big emphasis on Dandori, which is basically just a Japanese practice of planning out your day in great detail with deep strategy to achieve your goals more efficiently. And, it's emphasized that idea a lot, but you don't actually need to do things efficiently, so there's no consequence for taking as long as you want to complete tasks. I've spent 8 in-game days in the Pikmin 4 demo, and, they emphasize a lot like, hey, you're on the rescue corps, you need to make sure that you're going very efficiently so that you're rescuing as many castaways as possible, as quickly as possible, because Dandori, right? But there's no actual consequence because otherwise you wouldn't be able to get 100%. So it kind of comes off as, well, does Dandori actually matter or not here? So I think there's a little bit of gameplay and thematic dissonance going on here in Pikmin 4, but overall I had fun. I may have had a lot of critiques here. I like talking about where I think things are flawed and how I think they can improve. But that's just the way I like to talk about products. But overall, I've had a lot of fun. I've been enjoying it a lot. Again, definitely some things that can be done to continue to just make it the perfect 10 out of 10 experience I want it to be. But I'm now actually, having played some of the game, more confident in saying that it actually could be the 2023 release of the year come December. But we'll have to see. I can't say I was taking extensive notes as I was playing this. I wouldn't expect a review from me because I just really want to soak in the experience of, this is the first new mainline Pikmin game in 10 years. So I just want to have fun with it. I'll probably talk about it in more detail because I've been playing it a lot between the middle of July and the end of December, as well as Super Mario Bros. Wonder, of course. But I'm enjoying it quite a bit now. A couple other things before we get into Project Q here. I want to have a little preview for next time. I found this really interesting article. I can't remember if it was I want to say it was in The Gamer was the source. But either way, it was an interesting little opinion piece that was arguing this is now the best time for Sega to make a console again. And I'm sorry, author guy, but I'm gonna... next time on the Creative Outlet podcast, we're probably going to be dissecting that argument, and I'm going to be providing some counterpoints against it, because lo and behold, I am of the opinion, like many others, that Sega is never going to make a true home console again. So, sorry, author of that article, but I got some bones to pick. I also want to remind folks, today is June 30th. I am leaving to travel next week, Friday, July 7th. Of course, you'll have had the Creative Outlet bonus on the Direct come out by then. This should be coming out on the 14th, so you can probably expect come July 1st, I will be discussing my trip as well. But with those out of the way, let's start talking about the PlayStation Project Q. And I have a question, the basic question, the basic thematic question of this. Who is Project Q for? And man, I also can't wait to find out what the final name for this is going to be, because I know it's going to be PlayStation something, but Project Q is kind of a lame name right now. But whatever PlayStation something or other it's going to be, I don't really get who it's for, you know. And look, it should, in theory, if it were done the right way, be a product for me, because, you know, since there's a certain device that I've held near and dear that became really successful in 2017 and beyond, and it's caused this sort of speculation that Sony and Microsoft would try their hands at making handheld devices to compete with my near and dear device, that is the Switch. So, in theory, it should be something that I could want, because it's like a PS5 but handheld. But these ideas of making handheld devices by Sony and Microsoft haven't really panned out. It hasn't panned out pretty much at all on Microsoft's end, though they do have cloud gaming available on mobile via Xbox Game Pass, so they kind of, like, they don't have a dedicated handheld like the Switch. And obviously the only other entity that has otherwise truly made a dedicated handheld gaming device since the Switch came out, not including all like the other random PC competitors in this, but I'd say the main like big mainstay company is Valve with the Steam Deck. Now, Project Q here appears to be Sony's attempt at making a handheld console, but I don't really get what they're going for, as I've emphasized many times here. So let's just back up a bit. I want to give you folks some raw, unfiltered information about the device first, so I can really explain why I just don't get who it's for. So Project Q, it's a device that, like I said, had been rumored for a while. It was finally revealed during the PlayStation Showcase that aired on May 24th, 2023. The information that I'm using for this is coming from the Tom's Guide article on the topic. I'm going to have that linked as usual, so feel free if you want to read along with it or just give it a quick glance over. That would certainly be really useful. I felt their piece on Project Q was pretty much all-encompassing, so it was the main thing I focused on here. I also looked at the page for it on Sony's own website. But Project Q is a handheld that streams PlayStation 5 games using the remote play feature. That's what it's called, the remote play feature. And so it's basically just an 8-inch 1080p screen that has the two sides of a DualSense controller grafted onto it. And I'm not really going to get into critiques of the design, but I do think it looks kind of dumb. You know, maybe we'll go into that a little bit later, but right now I just want to focus again more on the information. Now, if you don't know anything about remote play, right, that is a separate app that is downloadable for your PC, Mac. You can download it on iOS or on Android. And what that application does is it streams what your PlayStation 4 or 5 is doing to that device. So you can browse the menus on your PlayStation, but more importantly, you can play games over Wi-Fi or using mobile data when you have a remote play session active. Now, evidently, Project Q is only going to allow play via Wi-Fi, and it's supposed to come out at an undisclosed time later in 2023 is all we know. We also don't know the price. There have been rumors floating around about both of these being more specific, especially with the Microsoft, Activision, Blizzard, FTC situation going on. I don't really want to get into this here. I was considering going into it next time, but it's just a whole big thing outside of the FTC, because generally I don't like monopolies, you know? There's really not a lot of people in the situation I like. And normally I'm more okay with Phil Spencer, but right now he's kind of annoying me. Anyway, back to Project Q. As far as the specs go on it, I already described the screen. It's 1080p. And I mean, when I said a DualSense, which is kind of grafted onto it, I really wasn't kidding. The buttons, the features, the form factor, they all mimic that of the DualSense controller. And now a tweet from Game Awards and Summerfest leader extraordinaire Jeff Keighley has suggested some more details. He's suggested that the display is going to be 60 frames per second. I suppose that's not really that surprising. What else would you target, considering you're talking about streaming? Of course, speaking of streaming, that 1080p and that 60 frames per second, that is going to be dependent on your internet connection. And mind you, that was an issue that Google Stadia had when it existed. And, there's different cloud-only games on Switch, like Resident Evil 7, and there's the Kingdom Hearts games. And they all contend with cloud issues as well, right? Now, one specification that also remains at the rumor mill right now is battery life. There is a writer at Insider Gaming, Tom Henderson. He's put out there that the battery life is like 3 to 4 hours, but I'm not going to trust that without hearing from Sony first. Certainly he could be right, but it's not straight from the horse's mouth. I like to have information from the people who are making something before I make a judgment on something being the case. And so, as such, I do find that concerning, but, he could be wrong. So I'm not going to let that factor into my final commentary. Plus, I've had plenty of devices with just as bad, if not worse, battery lives, so to me, that kind of length is not that big of a setback, but I also deeply understand the desire to have a long battery life on it, because of course you want a long battery life on a handheld gaming device. Who wouldn't want that? And so, now that I think we've pretty much established what Project Q is, I want to come back to my original thought, which is, who is this for? Because in theory, it should be for me, because I love handheld gaming. I really enjoy handheld gaming. That's a big part, aside from just the IPs that I like a lot on it, that's a big part of the appeal of the Switch for me. But a device like this doesn't appeal to me for a handful of reasons. And the most important one is exactly that Project Q is not a dedicated handheld. In order to use Project Q, you need to first have a PlayStation 5, because you need to stream PlayStation 5 games to Project Q. Now, of course, if you have a PS5 already, yeah, that barrier to entry is a lot lower, but even then, I just don't get the appeal because of the streaming aspect. So sure, for someone like me who doesn't have a PlayStation 5, the barrier to entry is the price of a PS5 and the price of PS5 games and the price of Project Q. Someone who already has a PS5 and PS5 games, they've already sunk that cost in, so they're really only looking at it as the cost of a Project Q. But that still doesn't get over streaming, right? A big part of what makes the Nintendo Switch and the Steam Deck so genius is that you're downloading the games to the systems. And so as a result, you don't need to worry about any issues as you're playing, with the obvious exceptions of the cloud games on Switch. And frankly, I do not defend any of them, because they seem to be pretty bad across the board, not because the games themselves necessarily are bad, but yeah, playing Kingdom Hearts over Wi-Fi as opposed to directly on the Switch, of course that's going to create a lot of lag, right? That makes sense. Now, imagine you have Project Q. That's how you have to play every game, because you have to play it through remote play. And speaking of which, there is also the matter that remote play is already a feature. It's been around for a while. In fact, I'm fairly certain that remote play was a feature back on the PS4 with the Vita. But of course, the Vita isn't around anymore, so now there's this new, like, sort of mid-device that Project Q is for it. But, aside from, well, not even that, right? Because I look at my laptop that I'm recording on here, that is a way bigger screen than Project Q. So, like, what benefit does Project Q have compared to me downloading on my PC here? Oh, I'm going to download Remote Play. And then I can pair a DualSense controller to my PC and then play my PS5 games on this screen. Why do I need Project Q then? Sure, Project Q is one device. I don't need a controller and a computer. But I guess I'm just asking, if I can already do what Project Q is trying to sell me on, and likely there's plenty of other consumers that already have the potential to use Remote Play, either through a similar PC or they're okay playing it on their phone, why would you buy Project Q necessarily? Like, you see the issue here? It seems like it's kind of trying to fill a problem that doesn't exist necessarily. Now, I've also brought up, I think in recent episodes, I have a coworker who is a huge PlayStation fan. Actually, I kind of have two. I think one is much bigger into PlayStation than the other, but they both seem to be fairly into it. And a concern that when I was talking about this with one of those two specifically, and I don't fully agree with this concern because I'm a handheld gaming fan regardless, but I do think it's worthwhile to put out there. She's concerned that PlayStation 5 games aren't really made for handheld play, right? You consider a game like The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom or Super Mario Odyssey, or even, now that I kind of think about it, since there are so many treasures all over the place, Pikmin 4. And those games, even though they're all pretty big, the designers made, like, they had in mind the fact that you were going to play them portably at some point, more than likely. So you're able to complete some objectives in a pretty short amount of time. That is exactly why Super Mario Odyssey had so many power moons. That's why there's the 120 shrines in Breath of the Wild, and then however many there are in Tears of the Kingdom. Because you are going to spend time portably, and if you want to complete something quickly, that is a quick little portable bite-sized thing to complete, and you feel accomplished. PlayStation 5 games haven't been designed with that idea in mind. So, since they're so much bigger, you'd probably need to play on Project Q for a while to really accomplish anything. And then at that point, why wouldn't you just play it on the TV at home, right? Now, to that same end, I also think there's a good question of if an 8-inch 1080p display would do a good enough job showing the visuals on PS5 games, right? And that's something I'm kind of split on. I don't really think 4K or anything above 60 frames per second is really super necessary. I've been getting, like, I'm perfectly fine playing games in handheld mode on Switch in 720p or just some dynamic resolutions on it, and on a smaller screen, and I've been playing games perfectly fine, perfectly content on my nearly 20-year-old HD TV that is nowhere near 4K, or, I mean, it can do 60 FPS, that's not an issue, but it can't do 4K is my point. But again, I'm just thinking, if you already have that large 4K display with maybe even higher refresh rates, like you can get in some PS5 games, and you can just already use those settings, yeah, then of course you're going to see Project Q as a downgrade. It doesn't make sense again. And, like, it's obviously too late to really make any changes to Project Q, but I want to be proactive here, because I do think there could have been, a PlayStation product that is a viable alternative to Switch and Steam Deck. And the simple thing that Sony had to do to make this work is just make it a dedicated handheld device. And I mean, of course, PlayStation 5, it uses discs to play games. So unless they really wanted to graft a disk drive to the system, yeah, you're not going to be able to play those disc-based games. But really what I'm saying is what Project Q needed to be, for its best chance of success, I think they would have needed to figure out how to cram one of those digital edition PS5s into a handheld. But you know what? Maybe that would have been too costly, or maybe Sony was really stubborn to their engineers that they were like, we want to have a remote play handheld device. I'm really not sure what pushed them to go in the direction that they've gone with Project Q, but I don't think the direction they've gone in is helping it as a product. Had everything about Project Q been the same, but you could download the games to it, or you could share a license between your PS5 and your Project Q, that would have helped things considerably, because you could just take out all of those Wi-Fi streaming concerns, right? Sure, you'd still have all the screen issues that I just talked about, but I think the big issue is would you be able to comfortably play games on it? And maybe it would hurt remote play on other devices. Oh, well, why would I use remote play, even though it's free? Although maybe it requires a PlayStation Plus subscription. I'm not sure. That could be the case. So maybe it's not entirely free. But either way, why would I use remote play when I could just use Project Q when it's my dedicated handheld, right? Maybe that's kind of what Sony's thinking. But because selling, but I guess I think when I look at that issue of oh, you're diminishing remote play, right? Selling Project Q, selling units of hardware and selling software that people can use with it, to me just kind of diminishes that, right? Because remote play is small potatoes compared to actually making money off of selling Project Qs, right? Even if they're taking a loss on it, like a lot of game hardware has done historically. And yeah, like I said, there's still the matter of would PS5s be designed with handheld play in mind? But I think that hurdle, outside of independent titles and probably some smaller games, I would basically still see that going unaddressed, because most people are going to play on the console just fine. But to me, the big picture issue is this is not a dedicated handheld that you can just play the game on without any issues, and getting rid of that is really, really what matters. So still, there's a lot of time before Project Q releases, so hopefully there's going to be some more information that comes out about it sooner than later, but just knowing what it is so far, I'm not too confident in its chances, unfortunately. And frankly, that alone is the worst part of it, because it really would be good to have some competition in the handheld space, because before now, I would have said that the PSP was the system with the best shot of being a handheld competitor to Nintendo, right? Of course, that was when the DS came out, and that thing is one of the best-selling systems of all time, so much for that, right? But now I think the Steam Deck has usurped the title of this is the device that has the best chance of doing just as well as a Nintendo handheld. But even that I can't even be really fully confident in, because I believe that the Steam Deck is serving a pretty different enough audience from Switch for it to be kind of moot on that front. But the only way that any handheld game system can improve is if there are alternatives for it to compete against. And I think Project Q could have been the middle ground between just being a more powerful Switch-like device that's available at retail for a similar but also likely higher price than Switch, while the Steam Deck would act as the truly premium handheld. But we got what we got, so it is what it is. But speaking of Steam, we need to talk about this Steam Dolphin Emulator debacle kerfuffle. I used brouhaha earlier. I think it's kind of an overlooked word. It's not used nearly enough. as far as what's going on, because, the Dolphin emulator has tried to come out on Steam, and some things have changed with it. And I want to make a couple of things clear about this topic first, right? Number one, this is going to require some more sourcing here than Project Q did, so I'm going to have quite a bit more quotes here than I would usually prefer to use, but I really want to make sure I'm getting what the people involved are actually saying out there, not just fully me saying what I think. You have to paraphrase. You can't just read exact quotes every time. So, I am going to paraphrase some things, but I'm sticking to the original message as much as possible. And of course, if you really want to see the original quotes in written form, again, I will turn you to the links within this episode. I also want to make something pretty clear here because, lest someone think that I'm anti-Dolphin with my take here, I would have an interest in using the Dolphin emulator for some things if I had a better computer, for one thing. Some of its main uses that are cited from the front page, they're not my reasons that I would want to use it. Really, the reason I would want to use it is to play, old WiiWare that's lost to time since you can't download them on Wii anymore, and to experience some fan-made content in games like, I really want to try out those mods for Fortune Street in particular. Yeah, there's mods for games like Mario Kart Wii and Super Smash Bros. Brawl, and those are neat, but I had a lot of fun playing Fortune Street at the end of the year last year and the start of this year, so that's a lot of where my main interest would be, because I want to try out new boards. But I'm the only one, or one of the very few people that probably thinks that, so do with that what you will. But let's get into some background about what's going on here, right? First, what is the Dolphin emulator? So as the front page for the emulator states, it is an emulator for the GameCube and the Wii, which allows PC gamers to play games from those systems in 1080p with enhancements like using all kinds of different controllers with your PC, some reworked online multiplayer, and some games even have increased speed. And it also, as I mentioned, does allow you to play hacks or mods, or just install content not in the original releases of games, like fan translations and such. I could install that stuff on a modified Wii or a modified GameCube, but, Dolphin would just be a much easier option for me. It doesn't have perfect compatibility across both console libraries, but there are a lot of games that are playable. Okay, so what's up with it getting a Steam release, right? In late March of 2023, the Dolphin devs announced that it would be put up for free on Steam's client. Now, I don't think I need to describe this, but I'm gonna anyway, because you never know. But Steam, it is a PC game store. It's also technically considered a DRM that verifies that players own the games that they are playing. And then toward the end of May 2023, the Dolphin team announced that its Steam release would be indefinitely postponed. The quote from the page is, "We were notified by Valve that Nintendo has issued a cease and desist citing the DMCA against Dolphin's Steam page and have removed Dolphin from Steam until the matter is settled." Unquote. So until that's resolved, it just seems like the parties involved are trying to figure out what, if anything, can be done to resolve this issue. And this now brings me to an article by Sean Hollister on The Verge. And I'm looking at this article because I think it paints a nice, fuller picture of the events that have gone down. So typically in these types of scenarios, and we've seen it a lot with fan games, fan remakes, I'm thinking of AM2R in particular, and then obviously the websites that just offer ROMs straight up for free, Nintendo will commonly just swoop in, declare DMCA, and then the product or whatever it is quashed. And I think that process is unjust, right? But we have to look at it from all angles, right? If you're Nintendo or you're any other developer, publisher for that matter, you're supposed to enforce your copyrights. Any random fan, they don't actually have the rights to use the trademarks or like the characters or the copyrights or just whatever is within a game IP owned by somebody else. Legally, the publishers and the developers have the right to take that content down. Now, there's a lot that don't do that, but they do have the right to do that. And as nice as it would be, it's also not exactly realistic to think that Nintendo and random devs are just going to work together and be all hunky-dory, right? Sure, you've seen Sega kind of do that, and then you see people like Dr. M64, again, that's one of the main proponents of AM2R. He's now working on the Ori series for Xbox. And then you have other folks out there who that worked on that game, AM2R specifically, that have gone on to form their own studios that they're like, it's an actual business now. I guess I should also say on the Sega example, though, you did have, of course, Christian Whitehead. He's the big one. He went to Sega after doing just some development, not releasing the Sonic CD mobile port, but he was developing it regardless. He went to Sega to make it official. These aren't just people like, I'm just saying the comparison of making a Mario game that is on the PC or making a modified Zelda game or whatever that runs on Wii is not exactly the same. They're more complex than they look at first glance. But yes, as a general rule, when you see somebody just making an interesting creative piece, and then you have the big, giant multinational corporation come in and enforce their copyrights, even though they're legally in the right, yeah, it looks pretty villainous. And, there's good reason that they are viewed the way that they are, because it looks really villainous, even though legally they are in the right. It's just, there's good reason for that perception to be the case. Now, how does all this apply to the Dolphin Steam situation, right? So as Hollister writes, now this didn't just happen like any other of those scenarios usually do, because it was not just that Nintendo happened to find this, it was specifically Valve themselves who notified Nintendo that Dolphin was coming to Steam. Now, it was also Valve's choice, right? Granted, I would say kind of at Nintendo's suggestions, and maybe you could say it was a coerced choice, but still a choice nonetheless, to remove Dolphin from Steam, right? And I should also mention that though it is Nintendo's MO, like I just went over it, they'll find something that's getting really popular and they'll squash it, right? That exact MO is also a big part of what implored the folks at Valve to even notify Nintendo at all, because yeah, it would probably look even worse for them to just, not tell Nintendo about it and then have them come and squash it and make a whole big thing out of it, even though just the way it's gone down has already made a big thing because of how it is, right? In fact, in the quote that was provided to The Verge for this article, right, that I'm citing from here, the spokesperson from Valve did describe their actions as proactive. So they were specifically thinking about this. They were thinking about this could be an issue. We're going to let you guys know about it because it could be an issue. And then things have unfolded as they have. And so what Nintendo did is they provided Valve with a letter. It's a pretty short letter. It's in the article, so I recommend you give it a read, but I'm going to try to give what I think are the important parts here. And just a reminder, though, you do need to kind of sift through the legalese to really understand it. But I'm going to try to give you this the best as I can as somebody who is not a lawyer, as somebody who's just reading the words on the page. So this letter from the legal rep it starts with some niceties, but then it just goes right into the main issue as soon as you hit the second paragraph. And that paragraph mostly spends time describing what Dolphin is, but it does bring up an important point that I think helps explain this situation beyond it just being a standard, ordinary, I'm Nintendo and I'm issuing a cease and desist here. And I say this because the letter does not go after Dolphin itself. You can, right at this very moment, still go to Dolphin's webpage and you can still download the emulator. And again, if there's any lawyers listening, that is not an endorsement of it. I'm not trying to push anybody to download the Dolphin emulator. I'm just pointing out, you don't have to get it on Steam. You can still get it there just fine. It's still there, okay? But there's a device that is brought up in this second paragraph that I think might reveal a little bit more of an interesting angle to this, and it's one we've talked a little bit about already today. It is the Steam Deck. Now, I am sure you can already get Dolphin on a Steam Deck if you try hard enough, but having Dolphin directly on Steam when you're downloading games to your Steam Deck via Steam just makes things a whole heck of a lot easier, right? I don't know what kind of methods you have to use right now to get Dolphin on the Steam Deck, but I'm sure it is not as easy as going on to Steam and clicking download, right? That's the obvious, most easy way of ever downloading something is just clicking download and it's on your device. So now, let's, again, pretend you're Nintendo, right? And you have any intent, which, to be fair, they have shown very little of yet, of just bringing tons of GameCube games or tons of Wii games to Switch, which, granted, in recent history, they've done way more of that than they ever have before, considering you have Skyward Sword HD and Return to Dreamland Deluxe, and, of course, Pikmin 1 and 2 and Metroid Prime Remastered, not to mention Super Mario Sunshine and Super Mario Galaxy via Super Mario 3D All-Stars on Switch, but I was really more thinking in my head of like, hey, we're going to have a GameCube or a Wii Nintendo Switch Online application, right? The idea of having a competing handheld device out there that lets you play GameCube and Wii ROMs enhanced, yeah. Of course, that's going to be a red flag because that's one of the things that you want to do, right? If you're thinking about this from Nintendo's perspective, you don't want that out there because that's taking away potential sales from what you are doing, right? That paragraph then ends by, it basically just says to the effect, we're going to lay out why you, Valve, need to remove Dolphin from Steam. And their reasoning comes down to a few things. For one thing, Dolphin just allows players to play GameCube games and Wii games, which Nintendo either owns or they control the copyrights to, or they just control the ability to distribute them in some way through their licensing right. And in line with that, what allows Nintendo to enforce their copyrights is encryption that is on the GameCube and the Wii consoles, as well as on the games. And I want to emphasize this first point. There's not just encryption on the games, there's encryption on the consoles. And I point that out because I think, again, not a lawyer, definitely not a judge, but to me, this seems to be the thing that would give Nintendo a leg to stand on legally, or at the very least, a stronger leg to stand on than in other cases, but I'm going to go into that soon, okay? But to make the rest of the letter short, it talks about, hey, the Wii and GameCube, they have games, they're encrypted with keys. The way Dolphin works is by incorporating those keys without Nintendo's authorization. That violates the Copyright Act, and, the reason we do that is because, we want to protect our IP from piracy. Another point I want to touch on here, considering the particular systems that we're talking about, and then they also point out that Dolphin was also removed from the Xbox store, which, I'm just saying, if it was removed from another store, it certainly would help their case that it shouldn't be on Steam, but that's beside the point. And then they finally end the letter by just saying, hey, Valve, could you guys, remove Dolphin from Steam? Except they say it in a lot more legally lawyery way, right? So where do we go from here with this information? I do have some more of the article that I want to get into, but I also want to address some of my takes on the issues that have been brought up so far. specifically the ones in the letter. And fortunately, I do think the article can help me along the way. Of course, I've already talked about the Steam Deck connection here, right? If putting Dolphin onto Steam did not mean getting easy access to Dolphin on the Steam Deck, to be frank, I don't even know if this project would have gone forward at all. I mean, Dolphin would have gone forward. It's obviously still being worked on, right? But I'm saying I don't know if this idea of a Steam release would have even happened in the first place. And that is, that's not to say that I think the Dolphin devs have malicious intent, right? I'm not saying that they're like, we're gonna subvert Nintendo here by putting our emulator on Steam and making it easily available. I do not think that's what their goal is. I think their motives, and I'd be really interested to get more information again from people who work on this, like why they wanted to do this, but my speculation right now is they want to help people get the emulator on Steam Deck. And I don't think there's necessarily an issue with that personally, right? Because I can foresee all kinds of people with a Steam Deck. They want to use it for emulation. One emulator they probably want to use is Dolphin. So rather than making people jump through all the hoops that you need to go through to actually install Dolphin on Steam Deck right now, just put it up on Steam, and then that should make it a whole heck of a lot easier, right? I think that makes sense. But also, like I said, Dolphin is perfectly accessible from its website. Still not an endorsement. Again, just pointing out that it's there. You can still get it without any problems. So if you're somebody who really wants to use it on your computer, or you're someone who really wants to use it on Steam Deck, PC gamers are pretty savvy when it comes to tech, so they can probably just get it from there if they want. So again, I'm really trying to understand the purpose of putting it on Steam in the first place when there's still that easy alternative there. Now, the point on the fact that copyright measures encryption is on the Wii and GameCube consoles, I really, really think this is what gives Nintendo the legal grounds to do this. Certainly, they have a lot stronger legal grounds to do this, I think, because of that specific aspect. And the article, Hollister seems to make that connection as well. Here's another quote from the article. Quote, "The email confirms this is nothing like a typical DMC takedown request, and that may be why Valve didn't give Dolphin a chance to combat it," unquote. So that's just saying, hey, Valve is just taking it down. Dolphin doesn't have any chance to respond. And I think it's because of this encryption issue, right? So Hollister has noted references to Section 1201 of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. And I want to emphasize, too, that like Hollister, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a judge, I'm not in the legal field. I only ever took one undergrad legal writing course. That's all my legal law experience, right? So I can only really go off of his understanding in the article and the understanding I have reading his words, okay? As his quote says, right? Which also he's citing some other lawyers, but as his quote says, Section 1201, subsection A, subsection 2, says that companies cannot host copyright circumvention technology, unquote. And then so Hollister just follows that up. He shows the whole section, but I feel like that one sentence alone right there explains it pretty clearly. Dolphin doesn't come with game ROMs. Doesn't come with game ROMs with their keys, for sure. You have to go seek those out on your own. But because the Wii and the GameCube have their own encryption methods built in, and then they are therefore built into Dolphin, as a layman, it would seem pretty clear to me that a judge would rule putting Dolphin on Steam to be a violation of Section 1201, subsection A, subsection 2, because it would be a company, that is Valve, hosting copyright circumvention technology, because it's an emulator which is circumventing Nintendo's copyrights. So, again, that's at least how I'm interpreting it, right? Something that also clarifies, again, is that this letter, it threatens suit if the requests were not followed, and that would be against Valve. It would not be against Dolphin, because they're not trying to remove Dolphin from the face of the earth. They're trying to not have Dolphin be on Steam, and those are two pretty different situations from each other. They might not seem like they're different, but they are pretty different, because they're not saying that it can't be available. They're saying it can't be available here according to this law. Now, let's move on to the points where I need to attack Nintendo on this, or at the very least their legal representatives' arguments, because I have some issues with those as well. As I've said many times in this, the principle still stands. They need to enforce their copyright. If I had any copyrights, I'd be enforcing my copyrights. I would expect pretty much anybody else to be doing the same, right? But that perspective from your average consumer would be so much easier to swallow, right? If they were actively, consistently doing way more stuff with GameCube games or with Wii games. Like I said, those two systems, they're not on Switch Online. Most of the games in their libraries, outside of the handful that I mentioned, and probably some more, Dokapon Kingdom also just came out on Switch. That was originally a Wii and PS2 game, actually. But most of the other, like a lot of the GameCube games and the Wii games out there you want to play are only on that library. So you can only access them with an original copy or a copy of that same game that's on another system if it's a multi-platform game. But outside of those few remakes or those few remasters or re-releases on Switch on other platforms, you need those original games, right? You can't play them any other way, right? So, bottom line, Nintendo is legally in their legal rights to fight this copyright issue. But, if they're going to do all this, it would be really nice to see them put their money where their mouth is and put out more legacy GameCube and Wii content on Switch, because you're not giving your audience any indication that there's enough work being done to make these games available again, because otherwise, without really working hard on making lots and lots and lots of GameCube and Wii games available, this is just going to come off as draconian, right? And that's kind of just how it looks to your average person. It looks draconian, and for a good reason. The next point, it comes from another piece within this article, and I really do need to thank Sean Hollister quite a bit here, because he's providing a lot of really, really useful information. This article has been a great resource. So a statement was provided to The Verge from a Nintendo representative, and it attempts to paint Dolphin as a, quote, illegal emulator, unquote. And that's a tough claim to make when you consider things like, hey, there's the Bleem lawsuits, and that pretty much determined, emulating systems is fine. It's distributing ROMs for the games that is not fine, right? Now, granted, it's obvious what something like Dolphin would be used for. It's obviously meant to be used for emulation. So even if the encryption issues weren't there, I could just see why Nintendo would go after it in the first place. But again, that Bleem case law still stands, so trying to paint it as an illegal emulator, I think, is a bit of a stretch. And, someone else who I think believes that, but also I think has another perspective on this that's a little broader than mine, he has one that I wanted to provide here. So I actually have some quotations from one of Dolphin's developers on what they think could happen if they went to court with Nintendo. So really the basic legal question here at hand is, well, okay, it's not necessarily a legal question. If my professor in the class heard this, he would not be very happy with me. But the question at play is, would a suit against Dolphin actually prevail? Okay, not this suit against Valve. We're saying a straight suit from Nintendo against Dolphin saying, you cannot emulate the GameCube and Wii in Dolphin. Okay? And there was an article in Games Radar. It provides some of the comments that the Dolphin developer, one of them, he goes by the alias Delroth, and he made these comments on Mastodon. Okay? Dolphin, I'm just reading all these D names, getting confused now. Delroth claims that this is a situation that suggests people really don't understand how ambiguous U.S. copyright law is. I would agree. U.S. copyright law is very vague. But where I would push back on that is, I think Delroth is kind of missing the point of threatening or straight up bringing suits on this topic, because yeah, the whole point of a suit is to clarify the correct answer to the legal question at hand. Okay, obviously that would not be either specific party's purpose in this situation. Nintendo's purpose would be to try to not have Dolphin be out there, and Dolphin's purpose would be to keep Dolphin out there. That's their purpose. But I'm saying if you're looking at it as a lawyer, the purpose is to determine what is the actual correct answer to this question when you compare the facts to the law, right? So I think he's Delroth, I think you're kind of missing that whole point there, because yeah, U.S. copyright law is vague, but you're bringing suit to clarify that. That's the whole point, right? At the end of the day, okay? I also think that this point, yeah, it's interesting, but if anything, I do think the vaguity, if that's even a word, but the vagueness that exists right now in U.S. copyright law is honestly making things a lot better for the folks at Dolphin right now. Here's another quote. People can't fathom that nobody has a clue whether emulators for 7th gen consoles might be infringing DMCA anti-circumvention clauses. Lawyers, courts, emulation developers, Nintendo, no one. Everyone who cares does know that it operates, and has always operated, in a gray area though, unquote. And that quotation there, to me, it for one thing, it just goes on to further the point that, hey, none of the law around this specific issue is really clear and straightforward, right? That's really what he's saying, is nobody knows. I would contend, like I previously said, that the fact that nobody knows the answer is really making things better overall for people who make emulators, though, because you have not directly been told that it's okay, that it's not okay to do it. Granted, I suppose you haven't been told that it is okay to do it as well, but when you're in the vague middle, you have a little bit more opening to do stuff until something like this is clarified, right? I will also say, this last quote, though, I think it's really the most interesting one, okay? Delroth admits again that Dolphin uses the Wii's AES-128 common key. That's just the fancy technical way of saying the Wii's encryption. But they also add, quote, whether that's allowed by exception clauses for interoperability, whether that's allowed by some kind of fair use clause, whether Nintendo's broken DRM actually counts as an effective copyright measure, etc., only a lawsuit could decide that, unquote. And I do think, that is an important legal question that needs to be tested to close the book on this issue. But as I've already said, if you're making an emulator, or if you're someone in the gaming space that wants to use an emulator or wants to have those available, I don't think it's really a legal question you want answered. And to me, that leads me to some final thoughts on this whole matter. So my big question for the folks working on Dolphin, or at least the folks who are like, let's put this on Steam. Why are you going and trying to poke the bear? Okay, I already laid out what I think is the case for bringing Dolphin to Steam, right? I think it's to make it easy to get it on Steam Deck. If I'm wrong on that, I would really like to have that point clarified, because I think that would shed a more complete light on what's going on here. And while I would largely agree with Delroth's assessment that it's unclear what the proper legal outcome would be here, I just don't think that vagueness in the question so far really makes the risk of there being a lawsuit worthwhile. Because the folks working on emulation have a pretty sweet deal going on with their projects. You don't have Nintendo or Sony or Microsoft or Sega or Atari or anyone else that's making gaming hardware coming after you, or your emulators that aren't like their own emulators for their own stuff. And that's a really good place to be. I don't understand why you'd try to do anything that could mess with that, right? Maybe there was not thought that this could mess with it. Maybe it just seems silly that it should mess with it, but clearly the fact that this all has gone down is a way that this could be upsetting the apple cart. And I don't think if you're somebody in emulation, that's something you really want to do, okay? You know, risking that by bringing an emulator to a commercial platform, and especially one that requires a piece of copyright enforcing material from the original hardware to function, when there's a portion of the DMCA that, again, to me, not a lawyer though, makes it pretty clear that it could be a violation of the law, comes off as kind of reckless, right? Even if I would agree with the assessment that, you know, okay, yeah, this encryption can be broken easily. Delroth specifically called it broken DRM, right? So clearly it is, at least in some form or fashion, broken, right? Even if I agree with that assessment, at least based on my reading of the law, to me it seems pretty clear that that kind of material cannot be put on a storefront. But I am interested, though. I kind of want to know how that would apply given the Bleem ruling, because I don't know if or what the copyright protection was on the original PlayStation. So I don't know if that case had considered that issue and would provide the answer, but, you know, assuming it doesn't, I don't know if it's really worth the risk to try to put this out here now, because it just seems like a huge possible, like, major downfall for emulation, to me at least. But I'm also kind of a risk-averse type of person. Not to say that all risk is bad, but I would prefer to go the safe route if I can. And I also want to take a moment, because I don't want to just be harsh on the Dolphin folks here. I want to reiterate my critiques to Nintendo here, right? The reason that an emulator like Dolphin can be successful is because of moves that Nintendo, and I mean, I'm sure Sony and Microsoft as well, moves that they have made as a business, right? Nintendo especially is guilty of some of these, okay? I understand there's costs to keep up services like the Wii Shop channel, to keep the Nintendo eShop on the 3DS and the Wii U running. There's cost to keeping Nintendo Wi-Fi connection going, and the amount of people actively using those by the time they were shut off, yeah, it's probably not worth the monetary cost, right? But I also think if you're concerned about these copyright issues in the way that you say you are, you need to show it in your products through methods other than just, we're going to encrypt this, and through like disciplinary methods, right? Because these are like disciplinary ways of enforcing your copyright, which is fine, but I'm just saying they can't be the only way, because consumers generally don't like feeling like they're being punished. So, keeping these services online, for example, and making sure that a wide swath of games that were first on these earlier platforms are still available today, to me, that would be key. If your goal, again, talking from the perspective, if you're Nintendo, if your goal is to make emulation unappealing to people, you can't be doing things that actively make it appealing to people, right? That doesn't mean emulation would still ever go away, right? And I don't even think it should, because most of the time, if you're making an emulator, it's because you really want to understand what makes a piece of hardware work, right? In most cases of people making emulators has not been because they're like, yeah, we just want to be pirates, right? That's not the purpose that in most scenarios people have gone into this with. But I do think the appeal of an emulator would be diminished to your general consumer if they just had the easier alternative. That's really all I'm saying here, is just keep the alternative easy, and you'll probably not have this issue as much, okay? So, now that I have spent this hour and a half here talking about Pikmin 4 and my issues with Project Q, and showing myself to be an emulation apologist and a corporate shill, since I'm sure I'm going to get both of those critiques from anybody who actually really sees this in detail, I think it's time to conclude this episode. So, folks, what'd you think? Am I missing some kind of true appeal in Project Q? Do you think there's a better reason why Dolphin might want to bring their emulator to Steam Deck? Am I a corporate shill? Am I, an emulation apologist? What am I? Do you love my thoughts here, or are they absolutely idiotic? Share that in some form of engagement. Maybe that could come in the form of a like because you agree with my thoughts. Maybe you could dislike it. Maybe you could leave a comment. Maybe you could leave me a very angry voicemail at, is it podcasts or is it podcasters? I think it's podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/the COP, and tell me what you think. But until then, I look forward to hearing, or at least letting you folks hear me in the next episode of this show that's hopefully not nearly as controversial. But until then, this is Brandon Pudwell signing out. Thank you very much for listening in.